Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sweet Home Catoosa. It's been a minute, but we are back, and we are privileged enough today to have Clayton Fuller. Clay is with us. He is our district attorney. Most folks, I think up until recently, with national exposure to it, don't really keep up with who our district attorney is or what you do that's so vital in the community. And to me, we've had all this national attention, and we'll talk about these things, but there's, to me, not a more important position as far as keeping us safe and our community safe and all these things than our district attorney. And I know on a national level, we've seen LA County, we've seen here in Georgia with cases, and we'll get into all those things here in a minute, but it's just so important if we have the wrong person or the wrong ideology in a position like that, how things can quickly spiral out of control. But and I'm going to read this so everybody can understand. So, district attorney for our 4-county Lookout Mountain Judicial Circuit. So what does that mean here in Northwest Georgia? Well, that's Catoosa County, Dade County, Walker County, and Chautauqua County, correct?
Yep.
And so you cover all 4 of those. So positions held himself as a defender of constitutional fidelity, local values, standing in contrast to perceived big city or federal dysfunction, which we've all seen that in the national news. Fuller's track record and rhetoric emphasized tough stances on crime and a deep alignment with conservative community standards, faith, family, and security. And that's exactly right. That's it.
And I'd have to add in there that federal dysfunction was probably related to the previous administration. So may need to hop in there and update the website since the November election. But yeah, a lot of that was from just kind of the chaos that we were seeing from the Biden administration. Some things that I thought were being done very poorly from a criminal justice standpoint. Sure. But I think that's related to that. And one of the things that I've been working on and have a recent op-ed about was specifically talking about how local prosecutors, local law enforcement can really help with the federal efforts right now to deal with illegal immigration and kind of the chaos that's been brought by the border crossings over the last 4 years. So that's a major thing that I'm focused on in our circuit. But I appreciate you going over kind of the geographic role that we have, because a lot of times I get out in the community, I talk to folks, they know either that I live in Dade, or with the title Lookout Mountain, they think I'm the district attorney or prosecutor specifically for Lookout Mountain, the city. But in Georgia, our judicial circuits are named after kind of a geographic feature. And so our circuit is named after Lookout Mountain, obviously, and then represents a really important and incredible historical judicial circuit with those 4 counties. And we have an incredible legacy of lawyers and prosecutors who have been practicing in this bar and in this circuit. And it's a huge honor to prosecute cases in these 4 counties.
Yeah, and like you said, the previous administration, so we're all there, right? I mean, we saw the open borders, we saw all that, and we'll talk about Lake and Riley, and that impacted us here in Georgia because of the immigration issues that we had, and thank goodness the border has been secured.
Yep.
The numbers are just astounding how little now we've got crossing our borders and the security there, which leads into a lot of things that you have to deal with every day from those open borders for all these years. But let's just stop for a second and let's get folks to know, what I call the origin story. So let's talk about you. How did you become kind of where you're at? Kind of give us a background of you. And, like me, this time last year I was running for office, never thought I would. Yours in an elected position. So, folks, you went to the ballot, you voted, we voted Clayton Fuller.
Yeah.
And so that's an important thing for folks to know, too. You're an elected position, but your position is just, like I said, hugely important. So how did we get here?
Yeah, well, where to begin on this? So I was a basketball player and went on kind of a basketball odyssey. And that really was something that kind of shaped my outlook on life, who I am, who I've wanted to be as a leader, both in my office and in the community. So had the unique opportunity, had this crazy dream when I was a kid that I was going to go and play college basketball. Just fell in love with it. We're coming out of March and March Madness in the NCAA tournament, and that's all I wanted to do. And so I grew up in White County, which is in Northeast Georgia. Some of your folks may have heard about, your audience may have heard of Helen, Georgia.
Yeah.
And so this wonderful, cheesy, fake German village that I grew up in and loved. But so much of what I loved about basketball and was driven to do kind of kept me out of so many of the problematic things that I deal with now as a prosecutor, and impacted so many people in my generation. And specifically, there were so many people who, peers that I grew up with, who were in the same circumstances as I was, um, and had dreams just like I did. But when we were going to college, that was when uh, meth was coming into our community in the early 2000s. And I tell this story all the time. There's one individual who was had everything going for him. He was the quarterback of our high school team. I joke around, if you remember Abercrombie and Fitch, he could have been an Abercrombie and Fitch model, had everything going for him. And when I'd come home, I'd sit down with him, go and have lunch with him. He wouldn't be able to stay still. He would like itching himself randomly. And I asked friends kind of what's going on with this friend. And they're like, well, there's this thing called methamphetamine. We think he's getting into that lifestyle. And that happened with so many people that I grew up with. And as you progressed a decade later, you start talking about the opioid crisis. And that experience, seeing what was happening to a lot of my friends, I wondered from a career standpoint what I could do to maybe ensure that the next generation wasn't going to face those problems. So I didn't know anything about law school. I didn't know anything about being a prosecutor or anything like that. So, ironically enough, I was recruited out to the Air Force Academy to play basketball out there. And I was out there on September 11th of 2001. And, that was obviously an event that changed my perspective on the world and, my role in it. And, the Air Force Academy is unique. If I kind of got the idea in talking to mentors there that maybe the law was the right thing to go into for me. And when you're there, you're taking 90 hours of math, science, and engineering. And I was doing everything I could to just get through the basic pre-calculus classes, and then being able to balance playing sports as well. And so I kind of realized I either need to stop playing basketball, which I wasn't ready to do, and focus on being a cadet and a student at the Air Force Academy, or transfer to a liberal arts college to make sure that I'm preparing myself to go to law school. So that's what I ended up doing, transferring to Emory University and playing Division III basketball there, and then kind of following this path of becoming an attorney. I talked to my family about, I knew I wanted to go into law. I found out that the military had attorneys called judge advocates, and kind of just decided, I don't know if I watched A Few Good Men too many times or something like that.
That's it.
I just kind of decided that was the route that I was going to be, just completely just random. And I followed that path, went through law school and got hired as a judge advocate in my last year at law school. Started my Air Force career in 2010 and went 4 years into active duty. And kind of had the idea that maybe I was going to stay for a while. Was still keeping up with all those problems that I was seeing back home in North Georgia. And in the meantime, I had fallen in love with this amazing girl that I met in college that was from England. And we got married, and kind of knew long term that we probably weren't going to return to England or my hometown because it was way too small for her. She grew up in a city of 20 million people. So we kind of identified this location in Northwest Georgia as just some place that kind of fit what we were looking for if we ever left the military. And in January of 2013, I went into a routine appointment at one of the military hospitals at Andrews Air Force Base where I was stationed, and the doctor told me that I had cancer. And so kind of a shocking thing to find out when you walk into an appointment. And through that process of going through that diagnosis and the treatment, kind of the conversation that I had with Kate and with God was, if I'm given more time, I don't think my career in the Air Force is where I want to be. Whatever time I have left, I want to fight for the community that I grew up in and make sure that the generational problems that I had aren't going to be faced by another generation. So that's what led me here in 2015. And I was started in the DA's office here in February of 2015. I was mainly put in the Catoosa County office. So that's where I really got my start here in the circuit. Then spent a year in this incredible program called the White House Fellows Program in the first Trump administration. Learned how DC works, learns how it doesn't work sometimes.
Sure.
And learned a lot about the White House and just some of the difficult decisions that people make at kind of the highest levels of government. And had a unique experience of working with special operators, and specifically there was one 06 Navy SEAL that I worked directly for, who's been a continuing mentor and taught me so much of who I want to be as a leader. I got to kind of travel the world with him a little bit, go to West Africa, go to South America to see special operations programs. And based on that, I came back, had the really bad idea of running for Congress in 2020.
I remember that. That's the first time I saw your name. Yes, that was it.
And that was really based off of, again, seeing the impact that I could have for the community on the problems that I was seeing, the continuing opioid crisis, methamphetamine, the overdoses that I was seeing. It was something that I wanted to fight for at the federal level, thought that was a great position to do it. And God in his infinite wisdom had other plans for me. And then came back to the DA's office after that experience running for office and got this appointment when my boss, Chris Arndt, left to become a Superior Court judge, and got this appointment in March of 2023, and have been focused on kind of bringing that mentality that I've seen my entire life and my entire career to this office, and making sure that we can create the safest community in Northwest Georgia and the United States. So that's kind of been my focus. Had a little bit of a break in that endeavor because I'm still in the reserves. I'm in the Guard in the Air Force. And kind of shortly after getting the appointment, I was told that I was going to be deploying. And so from May until November of 2024, I was deployed in supportive efforts in the Middle East. And it was an incredible experience, learned a ton. But I missed the campaign. So yeah. I was not here during that time period, but luckily, I was unopposed, so wasn't beaten by Mickey Mouse.
That's right.
Then I joke with folks, I think in a couple of my counties, I might have beaten President Trump by about 3,000 votes. So I joke with some of his people that I dragged him across the finish line. He grabbed my coattails and I got him there. So it's been just an incredible experience. Just everything that I've gone through in my life has had a purpose to it. And my focus is to make sure God's will is happening here in our community, and trying to make it as safe as I can. So that's what I fight for every day.
Wow. Yeah. What a great story. A lot of twists and turns, right?
Yeah.
A lot of twists and turns and everything, but everything along the way. And that's what I tell folks, my journey to where I'm at, I never saw it coming, right? There's a lot of times you don't see where you're at happening, but everything you were doing at that time was giving you key experience that you could pull from later on in your position like you are now. Yeah. One of the things most folks, thankfully, never step inside a courthouse, which is a good thing in most ways, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't understand, if I could tell somebody, if you really want to get a snapshot of the true community you live in, go to court sometimes when you've got, like I saw you recently, we were there for a bond issue for Catoosa County, and so I went to go watch that, and you were actually on a case that you were doing, and you get to see some of that stuff that goes on that you're like, wow, I didn't know we had that issue in there, which brings us to a lot of stuff that we do deal with, that you deal with, thankfully for us as a community, that doesn't impact all of us, but the people it does impact, it's huge. It's like fentanyl.
Yeah.
You talked about your experiences back then with methamphetamines, and now we've got fentanyl. Back in the 90s, it was crack cocaine, right? I mean, it just seems like it's like up in the ante. But the fentanyl crisis right now, and I guess it's Senate Bill 79. So, talk about fentanyl in our community right now, because I think a lot of folks don't realize how big of an impact it's having in our community, and you're fighting every day.
Yeah, no, it's a devastating impact. I mean, from the standpoint of just overdoses that we're having, we've lost law enforcement officers in our community to being exposed to fentanyl, and that's a risk to our law enforcement officers each and every day. And one thing that your listeners have to understand is that fentanyl is a deliberate effort to bring into our community. The components for fentanyl are coming from the Communist Party in China. Those components are sent over to the cartels in Mexico. They manufacture everything across the border, and prior to this administration's policies, they've been trafficked across the border. And we're talking the cartels and the Communist Party of China is making billions of dollars worth of money on poisoning our communities, and it's an epidemic across the country. There's so many stories of just tragedy just from our 4 counties. I litigated one of the first fentanyl murder overdose cases that was in Dade County. The victim in that case, she was pregnant at the time.
Wow.
So we lost both the mother and the baby in that case. And I just can't express to people how much of a frightening problem it is that continues to exist. So and they need to understand this is a deliberate effort to poison our community and our people. And so we should be doing everything that we can as a community to fight against that each and every day. And that is really my focus, is trying to help us locally, and then leverage our federal resources to ensure that we're doing everything we can to stop the overdoses in our community.
Yeah, and we're hearing that from President Trump. I think a lot of people didn't, the open borders, there was so much that was going on, not just the people crossing, but what else was crossing the border. Then, like you said, poisoning our communities and putting a strain on law enforcement and our judicial system and all these resources that have to go now to fight back on all these things that's costing all the taxpayers money. Because I hear that every day about, it's about, our taxes and all that. Well, this is one of those issues. It puts a strain on our system. It puts a strain on you, puts a strain on law enforcement, our jails, all these things. And it all started down at the border. And sure, it's an insidious plan. It's like, we'll send the product, we'll get it manufactured, we'll make money off of it, which is just a byproduct. But really what we're trying to do is just tear at the fabric of the United States of America. Tear it away. And, and in a lot of cases, they're having a lot of success with that.
They're having a great deal of success. And that's kind of the most frightening part. At least over the last few years, we've kind of woken up to, hey, this is a real and deliberate problem, and we need to take serious efforts to overcome it. And we've kind of seen that in legislation. We have kind of new statutes to deal with it. That gives us more resources to kind of go after the fentanyl dealers. But these cases are very, very difficult to prosecute. Oftentimes, the ones that are overdosing are people who have substance abuse problems and often don't even know what's in the product that they're using. They may have intended to purchase meth, and they have no idea that the fentanyl has been cut into it. There's kind of a famous incident where I think there was a bunch of West Point cadets, football players possibly, who went down for spring break in Miami, and against all rules and regulations that they have, obviously, they went down there and used cocaine, and the cocaine that they were using partying during spring break was fentanyl, and they had a couple of their members overdose. And that's the scariest thing to me, is when there are so many young people in our community who, you try to tell them, like, don't even go down that route on any controlled substance. But, kids are going to be kids. And in today's world, you just have no idea what type of poison is going to be in someone who just otherwise just wants to have fun at a party. And it may be at the cost of their life, and they had no idea. But as far as the prosecution of these cases, it's a really tough conversation to have with families, that we just don't have enough evidence to be able to show where the fentanyl came from. And from a common sense standpoint, they can say they know this is the person that they probably sold whatever substance they were using. But these cases are very, very difficult to prove. And then it's also extremely difficult when there have been cases where we've had people that have overdosed that have specifically wanted to use fentanyl, and have gone to buy that. And sometimes juries just don't like those cases when they see somebody, hey, you knew the risk when you were going to
Right.
use fentanyl and you knew what you were purchasing. I think people are, most jurors are kind of comfortable with a case where there's an overdose death and the person didn't know what the substance was and there's fentanyl in it and the drug dealer knew. But so the legislature is kind of giving us more tools, and those are things that we're trying to build from a protocol standpoint to make sure that we can investigate these cases in the right way to make sure that we're getting convictions on the back end.
Yeah. Yeah. We hear about it every day. I mean, it floored me. Sometime somebody took a picture. It was on, I think, social media, and it's like, if you see a dollar bill or something laying around, don't pick it up.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, why wouldn't you pick it up? Because it was deliberately laced or fentanyl on it, and it could kill you. And you're like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Wow. And like you said, you hear about the youth are like, well, they went out and bought marijuana and it was laced with fentanyl. I mean, it's just amazing what they're trying to do, but it's a tool, I guess, they're using to create an addiction path, a strong addiction path, to get them. And it's just, yeah, it's horrible.
So one of the main jobs of a prosecutor from my perspective, the way that our authority is set up, we're essentially the top law enforcement in whatever judicial circuit is there. So we're kind of making, we're going to advise on investigations, but at the end of the day, we're the ones that are making the charging decisions. And so we're kind of the last stop for anything that's happening from a law enforcement perspective. And one of the main things that I think is important for the community to understand is that there's a deterrence aspect of my job and what I'm doing. And that's one of the biggest things of trying to take over a new team, trying to get 4 counties rowing in the same direction. Because one of the things that we want to do as a circuit is send that deterrence message to the drug dealers and to the users as well, that, hey, when you're in the Lookout Mountain Judicial Circuit and you're dealing in fentanyl or doing anything selling fentanyl, because a lot of times there's this excuse that drug users will sell fentanyl or methamphetamine or something to supply their habit. And so I've actually heard the term, they're not drug dealers. They only deal drugs to feed their habit.
Right.
Like, you're a drug dealer.
You're a drug dealer. Right.
You're a drug dealer. And people need to know that as kind of the last stop for law enforcement decisions in this circuit, we're coming after you. I don't know if I need to talk like Tombstone or anything like that, but we are, if you have this poison in our community, we're going to look to build the strongest case that we can, and we're coming after you. I'm not playing that. I want to see this out of our community, and the changes at the border are going to help us in that regard, because there was kind of an endless supply. We're already starting to see kind of supply and demand impacting the prices that we have in our community. One of the things that I've talked to our law enforcement agencies about are, hey, let's go ahead now with a change in border policy, start thinking about the unintended consequences that are going to be coming. So if drug prices, supply is going down and drug prices are going up, that means that it's going to be more difficult for these users to be able to find fentanyl and what they want. So we may see an increase in residential burglaries. And so as a community and as a law enforcement official, we have to be able to respond to that, where if we're seeing an increase in burglaries and in homes, we may need to change our sentencing range on how we're dealing with these cases to, again, send that deterrence message. And so that's one of the things that there are a couple of historical examples that I kind of rely on to think about. But again, it's a real challenge just trying to make sure that I'm getting that message across from a policy standpoint to the incredible team that I have that are fired up and ready to take cases into a courtroom. But the community has to understand that our law enforcement agencies don't test our controlled substances that we take out of our community ourselves. We have to send those to Atlanta. And there's a crime lab in Atlanta that's testing everything for the entire state. And so we may get this, you may see a law enforcement agency rightly celebrate an arrest on, hey, look at all this fentanyl or methamphetamine we took off the street. But it may take us a year to get it tested at the crime lab because we have one crime lab for the biggest state east of the Mississippi. And those are those policy limitations that sometimes it's difficult to tell the community. We want to act and we want to act fast, but those are the limiting factors that we have, that there may be an outside agency that has to test our controlled substances, and they may be moving slower than what we need. And then oftentimes you say, well, here's this drug dealer. He doesn't want to take a plea offer that we're offering because maybe it's too stiff, doesn't want to go to prison for a long time. So we're going to need you to come up from Atlanta and testify. And what do you think that lab scientist sometimes in Atlanta says? I don't want to drive all the way to Northwest Georgia to do it. And it's like, guess what? We need you and you need to be here. So there's some unique challenges that we have that everyone has to understand. It takes a massive amount of effort for my prosecutors to make sure a case is ready to go in a courtroom. And that's why I try to tell the community it is a powerful moment when we stand up in the courtroom when we say the state's ready. But the community needs to know my office, my team, my folks, they're experienced and they're incredible, and they are always ready to stand up and say, we're going to fight for this community.
Yeah, that is the frustrating thing, and I'm glad you brought that up in government. So I come from the business world, so I come into government, and I'm, like, hey, in our world, we can make a decision and we can get going.
Yeah.
In government, there's things in place. For instance, we've got to put this process out for bid. We've got to go through these things. And so these extra steps, but it slows things down.
Yeah.
And so like you were talking about with the crime lab, it's like, yeah, you would like to, hey, we've got this, we've got that, we've got what we need. Let's get this going. And that one component stops you from being able to push ahead.
Yeah.
And from a public standpoint, somebody, for instance, yes, you've got the other side of that family that was impacted because of that dealer. And they're like, why in the world can't we get our day in court? Yeah. But it's not, from your perspective, it's not something you can control. It's an outside thing that you can't control. And those are the things that drive you crazy. I know they drive me crazy because it's like, I'm like you. It's like, listen, speed is important. And, we all talk about that, it's right to a fair trial, but a speedy trial. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you don't want to. It's factors you can't control. So I'm glad you brought that up because those are the things that just, like with me, drives you crazy. Yeah. Because you want to get going, results.
Yeah. And the other thing for us is, and a lot of people in the community don't understand this, again, we're a 4-county circuit, and it's a 4-county circuit based on a rural reality that I don't think necessarily exists anymore. So it's kind of like this idea that attorneys and judges would travel the circuit throughout the year. So we can only try cases 2 times a year in each of the counties. So in Catoosa County, for every case that we draft, we can only try it in March or September.
Yes.
So, and we have a limited number of people, and there's only so many, because it takes so much time and preparation to make sure that a case is ready to go. There are only so many cases that you can have ready. And then sometimes we have, there's a limited defense bar. They may all be on a case that's being tried. So there's all these limiting factors, but we have a great commission in Catoosa County and throughout the 4 counties. Anytime that we've had to go to one of our counties and say, look, for example, in Catoosa in March, we tried either 5 or 6 cases, all really complex, serious cases that took a lot of time to prepare within those 2 weeks. So it's only 2 weeks, 2 times a year. So 4 total weeks. And normally a case will take between 3 and 5 days. So anytime we've gone to one of the counties and say, we didn't get every case done that we needed to, they've been willing to give us a special trial term, but that costs additional taxpayer money to then send out those subpoenas again and to send out the request for jurors to come in. And so those are all things that we have to factor into our prosecutorial decisions. Are we putting the most serious cases that are worth the taxpayer time? And also, when we hopefully get that conviction, are we going to be able to get the sentence that sends the message to the criminal elements in our community that we want to send? So you wish you could just say we're going to try every case that we need, but you're limited by a number of factors. I hope over time there's a way that we can figure out a way that we can have more prosecutors and more trial terms for us to try cases, because we need it, especially in Catoosa County. But that's the reality that I operate in.
We're operating, and so I learned that, right? So I came in as a commissioner, and I talked about this. I do commissioner talk, and we had a courthouse situation, right, where felt like we needed another courtroom, a fifth courtroom, and I've talked about that, and y'all have all heard that. But these are the things. All these things weigh into each other, and you're right. So Superior Court, as I learned, like you said, twice a year in that circuit, and you're thinking, holy smokes, we're the largest populous county. Well, us and Walker are pretty close. We've pretty much, I think, right at or overtaken Walker. Yeah. But you're thinking, so Walker has 2 months, Dade has 2 months.
Yep.
Chattooga has 2 months, and you think, well, Dade and Chattooga's population is different. So I'm learning all that as like everybody else. And so there's systems and things in place, and you're like, wow, you just think, well, we get a case, we'll try it. And it's like, well, no, there's those things.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is. I love the job. It's a lot of fun to do it. It's just, you always have to be aware of those limiting factors that you have. And sometimes it's not a great answer when you talk to you talk to a sheriff.
Sure.
You're like, what? I've got this person who's going to be in the jail for another 6 months. And I'm like, I know, Sheriff, but we did everything that we could. We got 5 or 6 other people who are in your jail. We got them convicted. They can go to the Department of Corrections and be somebody else's problems. But it's tough on the unsung heroes of our community. Really are. I wish you understood, and I know you do, but I meant your audience.
No, yeah.
Just the problems that our jailers deal with. They're basically our public policy right now says our jailers need to deal with our most difficult mental health issues in the community, and they're the ones that have to deal with it. And then our probation officers as well. Those two folks, both all in law enforcement and with the sheriff's office. They're kind of the unsung heroes that people don't know much about, just because we put such a strain on them from a public policy standpoint. And right now, that's the thing that kind of keeps me up at night, is talking to our sheriff's offices across the 4 counties on the mental health issues that they have in their jail. And sometimes I can't bring those people to trial because they're incompetent, and they just get released, and then they do something and they're brought back in. And nothing frightens me more than our community's inability to deal with the mental health problems that we have in it. And we have to deal with it.
You're singing to the choir. Yeah. I've really found that out as well. We do. We have a vacuum up here in Northwest Georgia of mental health, and how do we treat those folks?
Yeah.
And you're right. They're in jails, and it's kind of like, they're not qualified necessarily, right, to deal with that, but they've got to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's just a forced thing on them. And, I know, like here in Catoosa, Sheriff Sisk, we're looking at jail expansion, and that's a project coming, but he's wanting to do a work release program, because it's like, we've got to be creative and find ways to decrease our jail population and do things to give these folks a way to get back in society that can get back into society. Yeah. And the mental health piece, that's a whole other piece. But, yeah, so let's talk about something else that, we heard about it a little while back, and it's gang activity. Mm-hmm. I know in Hamilton County a little while back, they were like, well, we don't have, any kind of gang activity, right? You're smirking because I heard it too. And the next thing you know, somebody was arrested from that, whatever that gang was. And it's like, well, wait a minute, maybe we do. Yeah. So what in Northwest Georgia, what are we looking at for gang activity, gangs and things like that? What do you deal with that you can enlighten us on?
Yeah, no, it's certainly a problem. Just from a macro standpoint, the folks who are bringing the drugs into our community are cartel related. So they're networks that go from our community to Rome or Dalton on all the way down to Atlanta. They're constantly passing through. So everybody in Catoosa knows that you have 75 that's passing through.
Yes.
Over in Dade County, we have 2 highways that pass through that. There's constant cartel activity coming through the community. So that's gang related. And there are a number of gangs that operate within Northwest Georgia. Just I guess 2 weeks ago, the case that I was trying, although the act was not gang related, the actor was in a gang. It was a kind of road rage incident, and this member was part of the Ghostface gang and ended up shooting just a guy that was riding a motorcycle that he nearly hit because he was on the phone. And so the motorcycle was going to turn into Walmart there in Fort Oglethorpe, turning left in that turn lane. And he swerves back in after the road rage incident. The guy kind of looks at him, puts his hands up, and the guy just puts out a gun, puts one round in his stomach. But this was on a busy Sunday Battlefield Parkway, and he put a round down range. And this is a gang member that was just living in our community. And the way that the guy on the motorcycle had no idea who he was.
Sure.
But the way that he could identify him was he had a gang tattoo right there on his neck that he could see as he was pointing the firearm at him. And so it's a real problem that we have in our community. And, you know, from a prosecutorial standpoint, we've got so many law enforcement agencies that are really well equipped to do the necessary research and to provide us the evidence that we need to make sure that we're leveraging all the resources that we can from a sentencing standpoint if someone's in a gang. But my greater concern is how do we go about starting to talk to that generation that would be even attracted to these elements that are in our community? And that's, I know Sheriff Sisk is focused on this as well, and a number of sheriffs across the circuit, but really trying to get involved in our schools and making sure that we can keep those gang elements out of our schools and not recruit a kind of a new generation to join.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great story you told there. We just don't think that happens in our community, right? Yeah, that's what we all want to think. It's, you know, it's a quiet community. We live here. We don't really see that gang activity. You know, we can look on TV and it's like, well, out in Los Angeles or the Crips or the Bloods or all these other. And then right now, you know, they're big news, national, right? The gentleman that got deported and, you know, so, you know, it's like, but that's not here. Well, yeah, it is. You just don't see it every day. But that one was one that, that's a great story that illustrates it is in our community. And
the gangs, especially that operate in Chattanooga, they're not dumb, and the border isn't some sort of artificial fence that's going to keep them out. One of the things that I've talked to, especially law enforcement agencies in Catoosa, and if you're a business owner, you have to keep an eye out for this. There's organized retail theft, so you may not be all that afraid of shoplifting. And my office kind of laughs at this because when you're dealing with so many serious violent and sexual crimes, it's tough to say, hey, everyone, we really need to focus on shoplifting. But one of the things that you can see from a national perspective, you may be well aware of this, but especially prior to 2020 and through 2020, there was this national movement that was driven mainly by George Soros to really invest heavily in district attorney races like mine across the country to kind of lift up progressive prosecutors. And their idea was to not prosecute crime. So they would call it, if you were going in to steal from a CVS or some pharmacy or a Walmart or something like that, they would say that that's really a quality of life crime. This is someone that, you know, needed whatever item that they had and couldn't pay for. So what we're going to do is not prosecute that crime. And we'll kind of see what happens if we don't prosecute those types of criminals. Well, guess what happened? You started to see, like, if you go on X, you can find thousands of videos of a CVS in San Francisco with just everything behind glass.
Yes.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And then one particular, I think it was in Oakland, I think is a really famous burger place out west called In-N-Out. And this specific In-N-Out burger, I think it might have been the first one. Think about like the Varsity in Atlanta or something like that. They had to close their doors, and they put out a press release that the reason that they were closing was because they faced so much criminal activity that wasn't being prosecuted, they couldn't have their business there. And that was something that had been there since the 40s or 50s. And those are policy decisions that are driven by campaign money. And so that's when I kind of say to my team, well, okay, the shoplifting case from Walmart, maybe on its own may not obviously be our most serious crime when it's related to the murders that we have to deal with and the child crimes that we have to deal with. But if we start to see a pattern where this is funding an organized criminal element from wherever it's coming, we need to treat that differently, and we need to be aware of it. And folks in the community need to be aware of it if they start to see, hey, this didn't seem like some random person coming in and stealing something. This actually seemed coordinated by a number of different people who were communicating over an iPhone or something like that. So it's a real problem, and something that our law enforcement agencies are doing a great job of focusing on. And we're really trying to focus on going after and getting stiff sentences. And I know our judges are very sympathetic to those cases and giving us the sentences that we need on those.
Isn't that amazing, though? Because you talk about it, and it's exactly right. Where we see a liberal mindset in major cities, you do see out of control crime.
Yeah.
We've all seen these videos where there's 40 people smash the windows, go in an establishment, and they all come out with the merchandise, and it's just like nothing happens. And then you're like, well, surely the police will come, and they do, and they catch some, but then you find out, sure, that there was no teeth to it, right?
Yeah.
Like you said. And that all started with your office in that city. If you've got the wrong person or a liberal. So it is those conservative values that I talked about in the onset are key for your position. You know, we're thankful we have that with you, but there are a lot of places, like you said, where they get snuck in or people aren't paying attention. And that's happening more and more because your race, when people go out and think about it, even if they run as Republican, let's just say it not necessarily might not be what ends up going on. And if you get the wrong person in that position, then yes, it's just a free ticket almost, right? And where it's just outright liberal in these liberal cities, it's just crime has gotten out of control. Chicago, we think about all these big cities. It's just crazy, gun violence and all these other things that just seem to be out of control. Well, there's a reason. There's no teeth. There's nobody in your office that says, hey, it may seem insignificant, like you were just saying, but we don't look at it as insignificant because if we treat it that way, it grows, it festers, and it just manifests into bigger issues. So, yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up because that is it.
And you talk about it can cross ideological lines. And that's where it has to be a mentality. You've got to specifically talk to the DA or prosecutor that you have in your community. And forgive me because I can't remember the name, but it's the high schooler that was recently just stabbed at a track meet. So it was, I don't know if you heard about the story. So it was a high school track meet, and the victim sounds like there was like a place where his school was supposed to be, and another student came into that place and was essentially like, hey man, you've got to move from this place. And for some reason, the defendant in the case had a knife with him at a track meet. And this kid's like the victim's like a 4.0 football player, going to go on to college. And the defendant stabs the victim right in the heart, kills him at this track meet. I saw the Republican district attorney in Texas that is dealing with this case already said, like, hey, death penalty is off the table, and also a life sentence is off the table. And then the defendant was bonded out already, and it's just one of those things where why even communicate that at that point in that case? How can you even say that? I'm sorry, if you bring a knife to a non-fight situation and stab somebody in the heart at a high school track meet, you took a life, and if I can prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. I just like
exactly,
and it's just shocking to me how that even happens, and that's a Republican district attorney. And but you're exactly right. These are deliberate decisions that have been made across the country. When you look at a place like Oregon, Portland, Oregon, there was like an 800% increase in murders after those decisions. And I would encourage all your listeners to go and read the reprimand that Kim Gardner, who was the district attorney in St. Louis, a judge read her Office of the Riot Act and had to dismiss a murder case. The reason why? Her prosecutors didn't show up. Like, wow. The judge was like, what am I supposed to do? I can't get a prosecutor to prosecute a murder case. And it, the people who see that the most and understand what's going on and are given a message are the gangs, are the murderers, are the shooters, and the people who are going to go and do the massive retail. They like, we know there are no consequences. And that's one of the main things in my office that I've been trying to really implement and tell our probation officers. We've been in a situation where we put people on probation, and we've seen plenty of cases where they've had 7 to 8 violations of probation, and they're still allowed to be on probation. Those probationers will tell their probation officer, if I mess up, if I don't follow these rules, you can't do anything to me.
Yeah. How frustrating.
And I'm going to tell our probation officers, we're going to go into that courtroom. Let's call it a 3 strikes you're out rule. You get the one opportunity to go on probation when you get the benefit of a plea. You violate once. Okay. All right. Maybe it's a treatment issue. We get you treatment. But once you come back a 3rd time on probation, we're going to ask that your sentence be revoked and you go to prison for the rest of that time. And we may not get that sentence from our judges, but we're damn well going to ask for it.
Right.
Because I think the community would be shocked. Like, what are you talking about? Someone gets 7 or 8 chances on probation.
Well, the ones that frustrate everybody are the ones that are out on the 7th or 8th, and then they commit an even more heinous act, like a murder or something. And it's like, what were they doing on the streets?
Yep.
Why were they let go that many times? And this is the end result. And that's where people get the outrage.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, kudos to you, because that is it. You know, we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
We're not immune. And like you said, maybe a treatment issue the 2nd time. But when there's a pattern in place and that 3rd event happens, yeah. I mean, what are the chances that that's just going to be an isolated incident? We all know, right? Because we see it every day. It just doesn't happen that way. So on a state level, we talked about local. I mean, what do you see on a state level, state of Georgia? I mean, you know, we talked about, obviously, that one got talked about a lot, Lincoln Riley, and that dealt with the immigration and all of those things, and that case going through. And but what do you see from a state level? I mean, what are we doing right at a state level? What would you see that things that we could do better from a state perspective?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. When you talk about the Lincoln Riley case, that's specifically, you're talking about a prosecutor in Deborah Gonzalez, who was specifically one of these Soros prosecutors who was sent into Athens to not prosecute cases. So when the Biden administration is thinking about, hey, we can send somebody to a community, fly someone down to Georgia, what community can they go to? Yeah, the illegal immigrant's going to know to go to a place like Atlanta, or they're going to go to Athens, where that type of prosecutor is there. And that office, because of the mentality that Deborah Gonzalez brought to that office, she had a mass exodus of the experienced prosecutors who are there to protect the community and to pursue justice with integrity. And they left. They didn't know how to do Deborah Gonzalez didn't know how to do the basic functions. So if you go and watch who was prosecuting that case, they had to bring an outside prosecutor in to prosecute Lincoln Riley's murder case, because Deborah Gonzalez couldn't do it herself. I think now in 2024, she was voted out of office by her community. So I think that message got out. So elections have consequences.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it was the most devastating type of consequence for Lincoln Riley and her family. And those are things that, you know, every prosecutor across the state thinks about and just hopes that they're building the community that says that the element that may be making a decision like that, where they're going to take a life, that maybe I shouldn't do it here. I'm going to move somewhere else. From a statewide perspective on what we're doing well, I think, you know, we still, I think it's important as a state that we believe in the death penalty. We still pursue death penalty cases. There are states across the country that don't do that. And so we can still pursue some very stiff sentences. What we're not doing well, there's a lot from an appellate standpoint that I'm really concerned about. I know a lot of people, if you have some insomnia problems, maybe you start reading some of the appellate decisions and everything. But the general 30,000 foot view that everyone needs to take away. And remember, those positions, the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court of Georgia, those are elected positions. We often don't think about them, that people are going to run on a ballot, but again, those elections have consequences. But the general movement is to make prosecution more difficult. And we already have a high burden, and we embrace that burden. But there are some things that happen that you just shake your head at the appellate courts saying, have they ever litigated a case? Have they ever taken a case from the warrant and arrest to having to prove that case in front of a judge? I don't think they understand just how difficult it can be sometimes. And most of the appellate decisions that we're seeing are making it more difficult for us to do our job. And a lot of times, and sometimes it's difficult to talk to victims and tell them that's how we're litigating a case, to make sure that this is going to stand up on appeal later on. And we make some strategic decisions with that in mind. And it's difficult to have those conversations sometimes with families that are going through that. So those are kind of the major things from a legislative standpoint. I think one of the things that I would always talk to our legislators about, and I know they bury their heads in their hands like this is the last thing that we want to hear, but we need more resources. When you look from a comparative standpoint, our salaries for prosecutors and our staff across the country, it's atrocious. If someone decided to get barred in Alabama and become a prosecutor over there, there's no way I could be competitive. Think about it, the thing that bothers me. If you think about it like the NIL,
Right.
so if the University of Georgia did the same thing that the state of Georgia does with their prosecutors, with their football team, you would never compete with Alabama. You'd never compete with Tennessee. You'd never get any star to come in through the transfer portal. It's a massive issue that I talk to our legislators about, that we need better pay to recruit. And my office size is also set by statute, so I'm limited on the number of people that I could bring in. We have enough cases to bring a lot more into the office, but we're kind of limited in our ability to fill that space. So those are kind of the major things that I talk to them about. Sometimes people laugh at some of the solutions that I have on it, but for us in a rural circuit, I tell people Robert Jackson, one of the most famous Supreme Court justices, he was at Nuremberg, wrote some of the most famous Supreme Court opinions. He didn't go to law school. Abraham Lincoln, didn't go to law school. He didn't take the bar exam. They did this old apprenticeship model where they studied the law with someone and became an attorney that way. I wish we could kind of deregulate what we do from a public sector legal standpoint. And that way I could go to a really talented sheriff's deputy or detective and say, you understand this world so well. At some point, why don't you think about becoming a prosecutor? Or one of my probation officers that understands the system, say, why don't you come over and be a prosecutor? Let's have this ability for you to get a limited law degree to come in and practice. And that way that would create more people who are coming into our system from the community that we care about, which I think is really important from the standpoint of us trying to get stiff sentences and protect the community, getting people who care about this place. And you would have people that would really fix our retention problems too. You'd have people who would stay for 20, 30 years. And it's just an arbitrary construct of kind of the last 75 to 100 years that we say, for you to become a prosecutor, you got to go to law school for 3 years and then you got to pass the bar exam. Well, Abraham Lincoln didn't do it. Robert Jackson didn't do it.
Right.
Why do we have this model, and does it serve us well? So that's why the legislators don't answer my call when I call them.
But it's funny because, so I've got a construction background, right? So I come on and we hear zoning cases. Well, I've got an advantage because I have an insight into zoning cases and that. And I think that makes me better at those things, right? Because I have that experience. So like you said, who better than somebody who's in the trenches every day with law enforcement that would want to come over because they've got the experience, they understand what's going on, they want to stop that. And you're right, they're in the community, they want to do that. And so you think that just makes too much sense. And sometimes that is what just frustrates you, is it makes too much sense. Why can't we do that? And these regulations or things or impediments that get put in our way, and then pay. We fight that here in Catoosa County. Our sheriff said, hey, listen, I'm losing them to outside agencies. If we can't competitively pay these people, why do we expect them to stay here? And these jobs are hard. And so we had to try to help, and we have fixing that problem. And you need that same assistance. It's kind of like mental health care. We talked about that. There's not enough money, in my opinion, being put up here in the Northwest Georgia to deal with those things. But you're right. You need more help. You need to pay the people that do the tough jobs, and need to pay them well. And so, I got asked, hey, what can I do next session? And that was new, and so I didn't have as full a grasp. But it's conversations like this where I can come back now and say, well, there are some things you need to work on. And you're right. They kind of look at you like, okay, yeah, great. Because I was watching this time, we've got a state senator, and everybody knows Colton Moore's our state senator, but I saw he had a bill, and it's like, it's his first bill, right? And I'm thinking, wow, that's his first bill he's put out on the floor, and it was some kind of gun control bill. But it's like he's been down there now for what it's like his third year. He just got reelected, so he just went into his third. So it's like that's kind of crazy to me, right? It's kind of like you expect, like, day one, if we put you in as our attorney general and you're like 3 years in, you're like, okay, I'm trying my first case. We'd be like, what? What do you mean your first case? And so, we need more local stuff. We need more local Northwest Georgia. And that's what my pushback has always been from our state side. And, I'm sure they don't like hearing this, but it's like, what are you doing specifically for Northwest Georgia? Yeah. You go down there and we focus on state bills. Well, that's great, statewide, but specifically our people, everybody up here, we want something that will impact our local way of life. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for. And so it is frustrating. Yeah. I feel your pain there. We seem like we've got a little more control as a commission because we can do things where you're at the mercy of some things, statewide mechanisms that you can't control. But we do need to get a better handle on those things. We do need to get more help. You need help. Mental health needs help, which in by part, taxpayers, it saves money at the end of the day. Yeah. Because we hear what? Oh, we've got billions in surplus. Then that frustrates everybody. And they said this year, well, we lowered the state income tax some. Well, I mean, it wasn't even a percentage. It wasn't enough to really do much of anything, in my opinion. So it's like when we have all this surplus sitting around and we've got things that we need to address, and crime, what more important things that we need to have to support your local office in this circuit to make sure that we're dealing with the criminals and you've got the tools you need to do those things so we can keep our community safe. Seems simple, but it's hard. Yeah, no, it is. And there's a complex array of entities that impact our ability to do the job, specifically for us as a district attorney's office. One of the things that, I talked about the crime lab. We used to have a crime lab in Chattooga. That I think that went away in the late 90s. That would be huge for us to have something like that. You think about the prosecuting offices that surround us. So Whitfield County can offer higher supplements that we can. So we'll recruit somebody from law school and we may lose them after a couple of years because Whitfield can give them a higher county supplement and Floyd County can do the same thing. Or if they wait a couple of years and get barred in Tennessee, I think Tennessee may be able to offer them between $50,000 and $75,000 more than we ever could across the state. Wow. So there's almost, a real economic incentive. So the thing that you've seen in my office, the culture that we built, which is something that I'm so mindful of, is that's great from what I can't control. Yeah, outside the grass may be greener from a salary standpoint, but I want people to say, well, is it really greener? I may get paid more, but I may work in a worse environment. Sure. So, culture can kind of eat strategy for lunch some days. And I want to make sure that I'm focused on that first. And having that element to it will make sure that we can accomplish the goals that I'm trying to do from a safety standpoint. But, I'm always mindful of trying to articulate the changes that we may need from Atlanta. There are a couple of things, oddities within the law that we have. So, for example, for a child molestation case, the age is 16 and below,
So the age of consent in Georgia is 16, but you have for child porn, it can be an image of someone that's under the age of 18. And so it's these kind of weird things that you may get into the law that you would like to see those issues dealt with on a faster basis, because it creates some issues for us. And but a lot of our legislators are great in picking up the phone and listening to my complaints and trying to find solutions for me. But it's just kind of like what we've talked about, what we do and the challenges that we have kind of need a faster response than, any sort of legislative body can provide, with the realities that they have, and trying to have a bicameral legislature and move things through two bodies. So
I couldn't imagine, they talk about it, they craft a bill, and by the time that bill makes it through, if it makes it through, it's kind of a shadow of what it started out as, right? Because everybody has to put a little in or take a little out, and you're like, what was presented was just the right thing, right? Yep. And so like you're saying, this is real easy. Let's clean this up, and let's just move it to 16, for instance, right? Let's just clean these things up, and you think, to me and you and most of the people watching, sounds like an easy fix. But by the time it goes through, it's changed and morphed into something else, and there's different things added, and it's just like, it's crazy, right? But that's the reality we live in. On a national level, they talk about it all the time. They always say, hey, a good pandemic or situation is just an opportunity to put some things in some bills that are going to go through that really weren't even in there to address the pandemic, for instance. But you're like, well, how did that get passed? Or where did that money come from? Well, that was put in the COVID bill or whatever. And you're like, that has nothing to do with that. But they use it as an opportunity. And it's sad that it is that way, but that's just the world we're in right now. And I know President Trump on a national level, it's just like you and I, it's common sense. Let's just do things. And I think that's what's rubbed some folks wrong, is he sped things up, and they're just not used to that. But it's like, that's the world he comes in. It's a business world. And it's like, this is how we do things. If it's just common sense and we need to do it, let's do it. Yeah. But up there, that's not the way things have always done. So it's just rubbed a lot of folks the wrong way. But I think at the end of the day, what I always say, you got to break an egg to make an omelet. Yep. And so that's what's going on there. So,
and I think the greatest lesson for him has been that need to move with speed. So I think in that first administration, it was very much, hey, I'm new to this. I'm going to acquiesce to having some people around me who maybe I don't know or trust that much, but I want them to see that I'm trying to play nice with DC and how things are done here. And then he's out for 4 years, can have those 4 years to come up with a plan. Then also during those 4 years, there are a number of different prosecutorial offices across the country, including one right here in the state of Georgia, who was trying to put him in prison for the rest of his life.
Yes.
Then he's nearly killed and at a farm in Pennsylvania. And I think same thing. I understand that after my cancer diagnosis, I'm kind of in a hurry too. And I think for him, he understands the timelines of Washington now. He's looking at the midterm elections as like, I got to save the country right now before the midterms. And I need to make every positive change that I can while I have the political capital to do it. And no, I think it's a product of him having a first opportunity to try to lead, seeing what didn't work, and then having that team around him and building up a plan over 4 years that they're acting at speed. And the other thing that I think most people are shocked with, everybody knew fraud, waste, and abuse. They kind of knew like, hey, we're wasting money. But once Doge was kind of showing specifically what we were wasting money on, I've joked with a number of people. I've decided I was going to like dress up like Zelensky and travel up to DC and just claim that I'm from some like Appalachian region of Ukraine and just ask for a couple $1 million and see what I can do and come back here and use that federal money to make this community safer, because it just makes me so angry that we're here fighting federal problems with fentanyl and meth that's been pouring across our border, and we don't see a dime. We've got some federal grants for our victim witness program. I've got labels on my equipment that this is from a federal grant. You can only use it for a case, like a scanner, for example. You can only use it for a case with a victim. You can't scan a document that's related to just a drug case, because that'd be a violation of my federal grant. We we show to a penny how we're using federal money. And then I see things being, spent in some random country somewhere that we can't even account for. And it's to the millions, sometimes billions of dollars. Like, just send something to me.
Yeah, send it back here.
And I can make a difference in my community. So that sort of realization was something that we all had an understanding of, but now we're seeing the details, and it makes it all that more painful too, to just see the waste that's happening out of DC.
Yeah, it's infuriating.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up, we always heard about defense contracts or things, and, it's a toilet costs it. Yeah, and we're like, what? But, we always knew that, and, but it just kind of got swept under the rug, right? And we all knew and understood that more than likely that money was just funneled to a different source. And so that's the inflate this, but we're putting the money over there. But now to find out, like you said, the projects in these foreign countries, and I'm still convinced, and I'm sure a lot of folks are, it's just a laundering system, yeah. But it's just so frustrating because we've got needs here today that you could use the money and actually make a difference. And it's not happening. So yeah, I'm glad. So from a state, and that made me think about this because you talk about the speed and where you're at in life and in your perspective, like with Trump. So from a state perspective, what is it? The Attorney General is kind of over all that. So looking at the Attorney General's position, let's just play a game here. If you were Attorney General, knowing what you know now on this level, what would you see and what would you do? Because I think, that's what makes a better leader. Like you were talking about, if you could pluck somebody out of law enforcement to do something in your office and be a public defender, or not a public prosecutor, that they would be a better prosecutor. So, if you could go up there with that Trump mentality in Attorney General's office, what do you see there that could be done to really make an immediate impact on your level?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One of the challenges, especially for the Georgia State AG, there are certain limitations on that office that other state AGs have that the state of Georgia doesn't. So a little bit from a prosecutorial standpoint, they're limited in what they can do. So that position in this state is not as powerful as you would see with some of the other AGs that you've kind of seen have kind of national exposure. You think of the New York AG that went after Trump. But one of those things I think there needs to be a conversation, because lawfare has been a real thing that's been happening not only in the state of Georgia, but across the country. There has to be a deterrence aspect to that. If the left is going to bring certain lawsuits or pursue people criminally, if they're going to open that Pandora's box, a state AG has to look to be able to do the same thing. I would hope that we would never go down that path where we're focused on prosecuting our political enemies, but that's the path that we've gone down. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Right.
And you'd have to look at those offices to be able to do that, to leverage those positions to say, look, you're either going to play by the rules,
correct,
or if you're going to go outside of it, we're going to do the same thing that you're doing. One of the main things that I talk about that I would like to see from a state level, there are two things. So the first one is I had thyroid cancer. There's some news articles that are coming out that it seems to be there's a disproportionate number of people who grew up in Northeast Georgia that's coming out on some Atlanta news channels that were all diagnosed with thyroid cancer. I think that office could really be used. And I know that's true over in Northwest Georgia, for Dade County, some other places of higher instances of cancers. I think that's been a story in Appalachia in general. So using that office to get to the truth on what's going on those issues, I think it's a very, very powerful investigative tool to protect the citizens against. I don't know why I had thyroid cancer, but I'd like to have the answer. The second one, and I've been talking about this for a number of years. One of my great concerns, and I'm looking at options that we can do locally, based on my national security background, over the last 6 or 7 years, the greatest problem that I've been talking about is the threat that China poses. They've bought up property in Georgia. They've bought companies in Georgia. They bought farmland in Georgia. They've done that across the nation. They bought land close to military installations. one of the, they've set up these kind of Confucius Institutes at state schools, which are basically Communist Party influences that are in our state universities that are being paid for by the Communist Party of China. I think that office could be used to say, essentially, we're going to make sure that foreign influence in our state is non-existent. And that would also be true for, so there's a number of election interference issues, both foreign money coming in. One of the things that I had the opportunity to work on after 2020 and the election in 2020 was kind of looking into the voting machines that we had. And the description that I give is that the information that I had was essentially, it's been shown through the dark web that if you think about our election system in Georgia as a house, now we at this point, and this is 2020, I don't know if it's kind of changed since then, but we can show that the house was unlocked. We don't know if the house was entered into or if things were stolen out of it. But we know that outside
it was unsecure.
And those are fundamental aspects that I think from a state perspective, the Attorney General's office should be focused on day one, kind of help of the citizens getting foreign influence out of the state. I want foreign investment when it's actual investment and providing jobs into the community. I think a lot of the Trump administration policies are going to help bring that back to our communities, specifically the empty factories that we have here. But then also focusing on election interference too, and making sure that our elections are safe and you can trust your vote. So that position, and then also just talking to the prosecutors across the state, just saying what resources do you need. The other thing is because we in a lot of states we handle all our appeals, and so that's one thing that a lot of the community doesn't understand. We're not just prosecuting cases. We have to follow that case from cradle to grave. And that can mean we may have an appellate issue on a case that happened in the 90s.
Wow.
So, we've had death penalty cases that have come back to us based on, one of these outside entities looking into a death penalty case just to see if they can find one minute mistake that maybe they can send it back to the trial court. So we're always following those cases. And I think one thing that, from a statewide perspective, is kind of supporting those offices that don't have the appellate resources that some of our, urban counterparts may have, and helping us make sure that we're fighting those appellate issues to make sure that it's not as difficult to prosecute cases as it should be.
Yeah, you've got a unique background, which is great. Military, where you were raised, all these things that influence you, and then doing the job here locally. I think up here in Northwest Georgia, especially, it gives you a perspective that somebody in a very like Atlanta or Savannah or somewhere I think it gives you a better perspective, to be honest with you. I mean, because, we're close to a big city, but we're rural in that way, and it's a great way of life. But you talked about those things with the Attorney General, and you're right. We don't think about what China's doing, or those outside influences coming and buying up things or doing things or indoctrinating our kids in college and all these things, but it's going on. And then we talk at election integrity, and we're not all stupid. I mean, listen, how in the world did he get this many votes? And then he didn't get this many 4 years later.
Yep.
Those people just didn't dry up and go away or decided they weren't going to come. We know, there's just folks that know, it's common sense. How it happened, that's up for debate, but, and nobody wants to really open that up. But there needs to be something addressed. And you're right. The voting machines have been a big thing. There's a lot of folks that says, hey, we just need to go back to paper ballot. And there's a whole system in that in place. And so there's a lot of different trains of thought because they want to make sure they're secure.
Yep.
Your vote's your vote, because this is the position. This is what happens. If your vote's really not your vote and there's influence going on that the citizens aren't really having a true say in who they want in there, and there's things happening where we can get somebody else in there that's not a true voice of the people because the people wanted someone else, we see the consequences of that.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part that folks don't want. And we've got to fix these things. So yeah, that's great. Wow, we've talked about a lot. But I think it's great. Listen, I've enjoyed getting to know your background and getting to know you, and I know the folks will feel the same way, right? Because, like I said, Attorney General, that's one thing. But when you look at, locally with our district attorney, that's such an influential part of our community.
Yep.
It sets the boundaries for what's going to be tolerated inside of community. And here, listen, we've got crime. There's always going to be crime. Unfortunately, that's part of it. But it's how you deal with it. And thankfully, we're proud to say that we've got a strong district attorney, and the fact that it holds things in place.
Yep.
It keeps those big, it's like a balloon. It just doesn't pop out and become worse because we're just not, like you said, it's just crazy to think that we're not going to fund or we're not going to even prosecute cases, or we just have that lackadaisical attitude. And next thing crime is just absolutely a huge problem in our community, because that trickles down to the taxpayer. Yeah. Taxpayers are funding so much money now for law enforcement and jails and all these things that your office dictates, and people just don't understand that.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time today. Anything else we want to talk about? I mean, we've talked about a lot, so let me let you kind of set a few paces there if you'd like.
Oh, no, I appreciate the opportunity. One thing that I always try to direct people to, based on my experience, I talked about the Navy SEAL that I worked for. One of the conversations that I had with him was, who was the best operator that he ever worked with. And it is this remarkable story. So a bit of a recommendation here. So there's a biography called Fearless, and it's about a Navy SEAL named Adam Brown. And just this you'll pick up the book and you won't believe the story. And it's something that I think about each and every day in this job. So he grew up in a small town in Arkansas, was a football player, maybe a couple of years older than me, maybe born in like 76, 77, somewhere around there. And he, again, similar story to what I was saying before, post high school, just kind of didn't have any direction, kind of got lost, got into drugs. I'm not kidding. He was a heroin addict and using methamphetamine. He had destroyed every relationship in his life, and multiple arrests, all this kind of stuff. And he had a wife that had to drag him out of a drug house at one point. And so he had kind of, in his Arkansas town, kind of burned every bridge that you could. And he went to visit a friend who was in the Navy, somewhere in Texas, I think, and was just, couch surfing and sleeping on his friend's couch. And, the friend was kind of like, I have a responsible job in the Navy, and Adam was kind of like, hey, this is really cool. Maybe I can join the Navy. And, so kind of had that conversation like, hey, I don't know if you can even get through
right.
the selection process with all your arrests. And I think he thought back to that Charlie Sheen movie, Navy SEALs, and he's like, Navy? I could be a Navy SEAL. It's like, no, I don't even think you can make it in the military. Well, long story short, he gets all the waivers necessary, is able to get into the Navy, and starts going through SEAL selection process, becomes a Navy SEAL, and has this remarkable operating career. There's some hilarious stories in the book. And when they talk about Fearless, this guy had zero fear about anything, would do the craziest bets that they'd ever ask anyone to do, but some hilarious stories based off of that. But at one point during his career, he's in Afghanistan, I believe, and he's saving people, I think either in a rollover or a firefight or something like that, and it crushes he becomes a sniper, is probably one of the best shots in the SEAL teams, crushes this shooting hand. Then he manages to be able to stay in the SEAL teams, and you'll have to fact check me on this. I think he also lost an eye, and learns to shoot offhanded at an expert level, and with one eye is able to return to the SEAL teams and is just an absolute lion for the SEAL teams, even after all these challenges. Throughout his career, he's always fighting the demons of substance abuse, and but ends up having this beautiful family, this beautiful career. The tough part of the story is in 2012 in Afghanistan, he's killed, and I believe achieves a Navy Cross in saving lives and fighting terrorists in Afghanistan. And that's one of the stories that I try to share, because if I interact with somebody in the criminal justice system, I can't look at that individual simply as being you're worthless, you're a criminal, I'm going to warehouse you in jail. There are certainly people that we face in our community who have no options except being warehoused. They're that dangerous to our community. But my job each and every day isn't to get convictions, it's to do justice. And I have to look at the individuals each and every day and make sure that I can recognize the Adam Browns of this community and this world who have a future to go on and do incredible things, and the people who are just going to be a threat to our community. And that's something that I wake up each and every day fired up to do. So as we approach Memorial Day, I just encourage your audience to seek out that book, know his story, and share it with everybody that you know, because that was that mentor shared his story with me, and I picked up the book, and I thought he was lying to me. I was like, there's no way this is a true story, but it's one of the most remarkable things, and our community has that redemptive quality to it too. And I just want to make sure we understand that, from elected leaders like you to me in our office. We have the ability to make this the greatest community, not only in the state of Georgia, but in the country. And it just takes leadership, and I'm fired up each and every day to do it.
Thank you. That's a great way to end up. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Fearless.
Fearless. Yes, sir.
That'd be a great read. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for
Thank
the
you for
time.
sharing your story and sharing everything, and educating us on everything you deal with every day, because yeah, it's wow. Yeah, it can be daunting. One thing I'll just say, and we'll end it out, is you deal with folks every day that are trying to take that journey, right? And you're trying to help them through that. And some you can help through, and some you can't. But it takes somebody with that, and you're pulling every day from like that book, because you're wanting to make a change in folks' lives. It's not like I'm just trying to put them in jail for life. It's like we want to do the right thing by everybody. Unfortunately, everybody can't be treated the same way, but we've got to have a good faith effort from somebody else. Like you just described, he was in a bad place, but look where he turned out. Yep. And so thank you for that. Thank you for what you do.
No, same to you. Thank you.
So until next time, thanks so much, and we'll catch you next week.
You and I as one will always be better than two.